Okay, so we already have people getting connected, and since we have the schedule very we have a schedule to complete. If you agree, we will start the meeting. Yeah, especially okay. So good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you. I'm Dr. Novel Merachu, the current ICOH National Secretary of Peru, and with the great support from the Working Time Society and the ICOH Scientific Committee of Shiftwork and Working Time, we have organized this webinar focused on the sleep, shift work, and health, what is needed for the balance in order to commemorate the World Sleep Day, which is celebrated today, 13 March. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Kyriaki Papantonio, who is representing the ICOH Shiftwork and Working Time Scientific Committee. Dr. Kyriaki is the medical doctor and epidemiologist with a master and PhD degree. By training, she is currently an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology in the Medical University of Vienna, Austria, and an associated researcher at the IS Global in Barcelona, Spain. She is an expert in circadian and sleep health with over 10 years of international research experience in studying the association of night shift work with cancer risk and key biological mechanisms such as circadian and sleep disruption underlying the carcinogenicity of night shift work. She is currently the local PI of Shift2 Health, an EU-funded project on developing strategies and interventions for preventing obesity in night shift workers. She is a board member of the Working Time Society and the current secretary of the ICOH Scientific Committee on Shift Work and Working Time. Welcome, Dr. Kyriaki.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening from Vienna. So I would like to welcome you as well all to this joint webinar between WTTS and ICOH to commemorate World Sleep Day. So before I start, I'd like to say a few words about the Scientific Committee on Shift Work and Working Time. So this is an ICOH Scientific Committee established in 1957. It's part of the International Commission on Occupational Health, a global professional organization dedicated to advancing scientific knowledge and good practice in occupational health. Our scientific committee is a twin association with the Working Time Society. You will hear more about this from our president later today, and brings together researchers and professionals from many different disciplines, including sleep research, chronobiology, epidemiology, and occupational health from around the world with a mission to understand the effects of non-standard working hours on health, safety, and well-being, and promote evidence-based approaches and practical solutions to address those risks. So we warmly encourage you to learn more about our society and our committee's activities and initiatives, and reach out if you're interested in getting involved. Today's webinar focuses on shift work, sleep and health. Night work is essential for many occupational sectors of our 24/7 society, and it has important consequences for sleep alertness and long-term health. Through today's presentations, we will share current research and perspectives on how changes in shift schedules can improve sleep, sleepiness, and shift workers. And we will discuss inter-individual differences in sleep and also performance, as well as personalized circadian and sleep medicine approaches and tools. Before we begin, the time is tight. Just a brief note about the format. We will start with the first presentation, and we will take questions immediately after this talk because our first speaker has to leave shortly after his talk. And the remaining presentations will then follow, and we'll have additional time for discussion at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A chat during the presentation. So I guess we go on, and I will introduce our first speaker for today, Dr. Philip Cheng, who will be presenting on precision circadian medicine for night shift workers. Philip Cheng is an associate professor of medicine and licensed psychologist in the Sleep Disorders and Research Center at the Henry Ford Health, Michigan State University Health Sciences Center in Detroit. Dr. Cheng's research interests primarily focus on sleep circadian rhythms and their roles in health and psychological functioning. He's funded by the NIH to study phenotypes of shift work disorder and translate the science on circadian rhythms into clinically feasible and widely accessible interventions for night shift workers. With that, I'm delighted to hand over to Dr. Cheng. Philip, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here and for having us here. Let me get my screen shared. Okay, I believe that is working. And then gotta move my screen around. There we go. Okay, fantastic. So I'm quite excited to be here to share some of our more recent work on precision circadian medicine with the use of technology. Some of this work was also presented at the Working Time Society. But before I jump in, just wanted to say Happy World Sleep Day to everybody. It's today, and I was saying we should party in celebration, but of course we know when we party we stay out late. Except for I found out recently that there's an organization called the Early Birds Club that hold dance parties from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And their slogan looks like a dance party for ladies who have, we'll say, stuff to do in the morning. So may we all find circadian and sleep appropriate methods for partying and celebration. All right, so to jump in, I hope today at the end of this talk to communicate that in circadian medicine for night shift workers, precision is really a need to have, not a nice to have. And I hope to show you some of the tools that we have to be able to begin to have more precision. So of course, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we all know shift that they are dedicated to this. And unfortunately, up to now, the best solution we have from the experts, right? So these are published clinical guidelines from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. The best thing we have to offer for our night shift workers who are suffering is plan your sleep schedule, right? And of course, patients are looking at us like, okay, Captain Obvious. Of course, we know sleep is important and obviously having a plan. But that's the best we have to offer. There are other things, hypnotic, stimulants, and in particular, I'm going to be talking with more interest in these two, timed light exposure and timed melatonin. These are acknowledged as potential solutions, but the only gold standard guideline with strong evidence is plan your sleep schedule. Of course, then in the real world, if you can imagine physicians helping our night shift workers saying, okay, here's what you should do. You should plan your sleep schedule. And patients will look at us thinking, well, okay, but like, how do we do that? And when do we do that? And the reality is, as a field, we still don't have very clear, evidence-backed gold standard answers yet. And of course, we're hoping to change that. One of the things that we have really focused on is trying to understand what the lived experiences of night shift workers are, because as I'll speak for a sleep and circadian rhythms researcher, sometimes it's easy for us to forget that human beings and night shift workers aren't just biological clocks walking around the world. They are human beings with lived experiences. And so we've done a lot of qualitative work asking folks how they're doing. And I could give you our qualitative answer, but they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is generally what we find, that night shift workers are telling us that they're not getting any support from management. And part of it is because management doesn't know what the right answers are. And so they focus on populations that they see and feel like they can help every day. And those are predominantly those who are on the day shift. So in this space of helping night shift workers as sleep and circadian researchers, I'm hearing an echo. Oh, there we go. So we are interested in this construct called circadian misalignment. And so to help us organize around this concept, I'm going to explain it a little bit. So on the bottom, you see time, 24 hours, specifically 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. the next day. And for most of us, we're not shift workers. We sleep. Our sleep window is sometime at night, maybe 10 to 6, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And laid on top of that is our circadian rhythm or process C, and that ebbs and flows over the 24-hour period with an alerting signal increasing throughout the day and melatonin secretion happening at night and overlapping with our sleep window. When there's circadian misalignment, as we expect in night shift workers, their sleep window gets displaced into the daytime because of their nighttime work. And now they're sleeping against this alerting signal, which means that they are now having trouble falling and staying asleep. And then when they go to work, their bodies think that they should be working. And so now they're struggling with staying awake or fighting sleep. So to correct this, we can use timed light exposure and maybe even melatonin to shift the circadian clock. So if you give light at this place, what you can do is move that melatonin into a place where there's more of an overlap with the sleep window. And we know exactly how to do that. It's been done before. Fantastic, right? Well, there's some good news and there's some bad news. Light therapy in theory is this beautiful construct, but in the real world, it gets a little more complex and it gets a little more sticky. And one of the main things that we're finding is that the assumption that night shift workers have physiological rhythms that match daytime workers is actually not robust. So we've measured it using in-lab gold standard dim light melatonin onset in more than 100 night shift workers. These are all fixed night shift workers. And you see the distribution. This is again time. So from noon to noon the next day, 24 hours. And you see a distribution that spans across the 24-hour period. And as you can imagine, there's a peak here at about 8 p.m., which we would expect. But there's another peak at about 4 a.m. So this is not an assumption that we can make in a robust way, or at least in a generalizable way. Now, in the real world, we don't really have access to someone's dim light melatonin onset easily, especially in the clinic. And so if we were to do a circadian light intervention, we would say, generally speaking, get light at night because we want them to delay and be able to match the rhythm of their night shift work. But if we look at people's underlying rhythms, you may see that people have different rhythms. And in this case, we have melatonin happening before the sleep window and one where melatonin is actually having decent overlap. But because we are giving light at the same time, what we're doing is maybe making it worse for everybody, right? So this person now still has overlap, but less of an overlap. And this person has zero overlap anymore. So we've caused more circadian misalignment. So we can absolutely worsen things accidentally when we don't have a precise approach. What would a more precise approach mean? Well, if we had access to the timing, we can say this person on the top panel has melatonin that needs to shift to the right and needs to shift big. So we're going to give a large bolus of light in the phase delay region. Whereas this guy on the bottom, there's some overlap, but we can give a small bolus of light and therefore get both people in this appropriate overlap that we're aiming for. So how do we do this? How do we achieve this level of precision? Well, we need to get a watch of some kind. We need to be able to measure or have access to an individual's circadian timing, right? Now, there's lots of ways to do that in the lab. You can measure saliva, we can measure core body temperature, but these are still pretty resource intensive and also people power intensive. And so we have been thinking about ways of getting around that somehow. And one thing we know is that there is a relationship to how much light someone is getting as an input and its effect on their circadian clock. And this is called the phase response curve. So we know that it's been plotted. If you get light, at this time, you'll have this much of a phase shift, whereas if you get it at this other time, you'll have a differential amount in a differential direction. And if you put that all into an equation, and essentially simulate the brain, what you can do is use sensors to get light history, feed that into our simulation of the brain, and the brain can give us an estimate of when dim light melatonin is. And so the way that we can get sensors are through these research grade ActiWatches, where you measure activity and there's a light sensor, and you can put light and activity into the model, and it'll spit out a core body temperature minimum, which then you can translate into dim light melatonin onset. And in this case, we're using Melissa St. Hilaire's model. And we tested it in night shift workers. This was a sample of, I believe, 35 night shift workers. And we found that we did pretty decently. So here on this graph, you see, again, this is more than 24 hours, so 6 a.m. to 6 a.m., and then another 12 hours after that. So you have time, and then and this is what was observed in the lab, and then this is what the model output. And points that follow along the black diagonal line means perfect agreement. And as you can see here, the dots are fairly close. Some are falling on the line, but we're finding that 76% fall within plus or minus 2 hours, and the lens concordance rate is 0.7. This is a measure from 0 to 1, with 1 being perfect agreement. Okay, the problem is active watches are not scalable, right? Very few people like these devices. Some of you may be looking at this device and thinking, well, that's not really a nice looking device. And we see that in our research. When we try to give these to our participants, they try to argue with us. They ask whether or not they have to do this. And the favorite story I tell is we had a participant who, after the study, told us that she ended up putting the watch on her dog because she didn't like it. It didn't match her outfit. And so we were very happy that they told us so that we can get rid of those data sets and not analyze it. But yeah, this is a real challenge. Nobody likes to wear them. And of course, in 2020, or sorry, 2022, the most widely used device was discontinued, which led to a lot of us researchers thinking, oh boy, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond? Except for this, our group at least felt like this may be a blessing in disguise, because there's been a large push in the last decade towards consumer-based wearables, things like the Apple Watch or the Fitbit. And it may be that with the demise of these ugly Apple or Active Watches, that now it is time for our consumer devices to get a chance to shine. And indeed, when we collect data looking at patient preference of the Apple Watch versus the Active Watch, you can see here predominantly patients prefer the Apple Watch for comfort, for convenience, for wearing in public, and for wearing for extended periods of time. Ease of use was the one that was lowest, but you can see still here it's above 50% preferring the Apple Watch. And that's because these Apple Watches have bells and whistles. You got to set them up and whatnot. So we decided, because consumer-based wearable technology has higher scalability, that this may be the way to go. And we picked the Apple Watch because if you compare across all the devices, the Apple Watch has the largest market share, at least in the US. So we decided to go with that. We created an app internally to be able to just pull the data from the app directly. And from there, we can replicate the same model or the same approach, I should say. Here we use Kevin Henney's model instead, but we use steps data and heart rate data from the watch, put it through the simulated brain. It spits out the core body temperature minimum, which we then translate to a predicted DOMO. And this is what we find. We see, again, on the bottom, what we observe in the lab, and on the y-axis, what we predicted from the models. And here you can see the points fall on or close to this diagonal line, which means strong agreement, and our Lin's concordance is 0.81, so a little bit higher from 0 to 1. And this is just an example or a reminder of what the active watch looks like. And the neat thing about an Apple Watch that some of you may already be wearing is that at any point you can actually pull historical data. So this is me tracking my data. This was when I went to the conference where I traveled time zones. So here is me in Detroit time. You can see I'm doing an okay job organizing my day and night. And then here are my predicted DOMOs. So you can see they sort of line up with my sleep periods. And then I moved time zones from Michigan to, this would be Vancouver time, I believe. So Imelda, where I believe you're at. So 3 hour difference. You can see I slam shifted. And my DOMO did kind of drift over time. And then I moved back. And you can see it's starting to course correct again. So imagine each and every one of us being able to track our circadian rhythms on a daily basis like this, right? How much impact we can have on our circadian health. So the question here is, can we scale this using the Apple Watch as a consumer-based wearable? So we repeated the experiment, except for this time they wore an Apple Watch for 2 weeks. We brought it into the lab, measured dim light melatonin onset, and then what we did was we randomized them into 2 conditions. One is a personalized light-dark schedule to try and shift their circadian rhythms, and a non-personalized light-dark schedule. So the personalized was based on the predictions of their watch. So they got a light therapy schedule adapted to their specific phase response curve. And then the non-personalized was just light at night, right? So they started to get light from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And they were also asked to avoid light in the morning. After 2 weeks of this, we brought them back into the lab and re-measured their dim light melatonin onset. So our first question is, do we get better results with personalized light schedules? So here's what we found. So on the x-axis, you see personalized compared to non-personalized, and the amount of phase delay, which was what we were aiming for. And in the non-personalized schedule, you see a non-significant change from 0. So this is technically a phase advance, but the error bars do not cross the 0 mark. Whereas if you look at personalized night shift workers, we get a 2-hour phase delay with error bars or confidence intervals, I should say, not crossing 0, and these are significantly different from each other. So we get a larger magnitude of phase shift looking at dim light melatonin onset. But that's just a linear time value. What about circadian alignment as a construct? And what we found was that if you look at the personalized group, we found an increase in the percentage of people who we would consider in circadian alignment. We got greater than a 20% increase. In the non-personalized group, we actually made things worse. They went from above 30% of subjects in alignment to 20%. So we caused circadian misalignment accidentally by not personalizing our light therapy schedules. So then we were seeing, okay, how often are we accidentally causing circadian misalignment or maybe worsening circadian misalignment? And here, by looking at our numbers, we see the risk of accidentally causing circadian misalignment was more than 3 times greater when using non-personalized schedules compared to personalized schedules. Okay. So that's the physiology. What about symptoms? So of course we know about sleepiness and insomnia as being the cardinal two sets of symptoms we're interested in. Here are scores from the Insomnia Severity Index, with the personalized group showing a reduction, whereas the non-personalized showing an increase, which of course is in alignment or consistent with our physiological data. When we look at sleepiness, so this is Epworth Sleepiness Scale, we see that the non-personalized show a small reduction, whereas the personalized show mostly comparable. This did not reach statistical significance, unfortunately. It is in the right direction. But then we looked at peak sleepiness using the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale. And we did find that in the non-personalized schedule, whereas peak sleepiness was 420, moved all the way up to 130, which of course AM, right? So that's in the middle, smack dab in the middle of most people's night shifts. Whereas in the personalized, whereas they started from 5:30 a.m., that got moved to the 9 a.m., which for, again, most night shift workers is when they're actually sleeping at home after their night shifts. So to summarize, these evidence suggests that when we use personalized approaches, circadian medicine treatments are actually more effective. And unfortunately, when we use non-personalized approach, there is a percentage of time when we may be causing harm. And lastly, the use of consumer-based wearable technology may be one way to really scale our ability to implement personalized circadian medicine across the population. So with that, let me acknowledge my collaborators, my funders, my fantastic team, and take any questions.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk and setting the stage for later discussions as well. I would, let's see if there are questions in the chat.
Yeah, so I see Jonathan has a question. What measures should be implemented in the workplace to reduce safety risk associated with circadian misalignment in workers returning from long international trips with jet lag? That's a fantastic question, Jonathan. The workplace implementation of interventions is to me interesting and tricky, because if we are committed to precision medicine, that means each worker may need a slightly different or maybe a dramatically different intervention. And a lot of the workplace interventions are, for example, changing the lighting structure or the lighting type, which is hard to personalize. But perhaps these retimer glasses, that could be one, and making policies or practices in place so that each individual can personalize time to kind of put on these glasses, for example. I know break times are often fixed at specific times for people. Maybe an idea could be personalizing when these break times are as well. But yeah, that's an excellent question that I think needs some more thinking. Okay, Cohen says, we know that a lot of night shift workers have a hard time shifting back to normal rhythms after doing night shifts. Does shifting someone circadian rhythms like this ever make it harder to shift back? That is a fantastic question. I don't think we have the answer to that. I believe that Helen Burgess has some evidence that our circadian system almost has a little bit of a memory in place where it's easier to kind of lock back into a typical rhythm. So that could be one. Some of my work has shown that our circadian rhythms are very sluggish and don't move very fast. When we measure DOMO a month apart, twice, but a month apart, they actually are pretty similar. So I would say that it probably is difficult to shift back, especially if you don't have access to really, really bright light to show really or get really strong entrainment signals.
Thank you very much, Philip. I have a last question before we let you go. In many of
Yeah.
the studies we do in the field with real-life shift workers nowadays and biomarkers, we measure melatonin in urine, 6-sulfatoxymelatonin in urine, to track the rhythm of melatonin. At the same time, we use actigraphy. So would you argue that the use of melatonin is no longer needed as a biomarker of circadian phase in shift workers in field studies? Because that would save us a lot of money, actually. So that's my question to you.
You know, I certainly would love to see that. I don't think we're ready for that yet. Or, you know, what they say about models, right? All models are wrong, but some are helpful. I would love to see our models get more complex and for us to be able to use specific model parameters for specific types of groups to increase our accuracy. Now, that said, you know, between urine and actigraphy, my bias is that actigraphy might be a better alternative just because urine, depending on how many samples you get, you know, you have a risk of missing what's actually going on. So if you only take 2 samples or maybe 3 samples, you're fitting a curve to that, and who knows, you know, how much inherent error there is in that curve. But that might be a good idea to test as well. But certainly, I would say we definitely need more tools. It doesn't have to be actigraphy. I know a lot of people have used blood draws or trying to use blood draws to try and get circadian timing as well. Um, but yeah, I think it's clear that we need to start moving away from melatonin samples.
Thanks a lot. We typically collect all urine samples from all urine natural voids over a 24-hour period in the studies that I was referring to. But
Fantastic,
let's
yeah.
follow up on this. It's an interesting, actually, question that we should definitely follow up on.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you very much for your precious time being here today and sharing your expertise and knowledge. And we'll let you go. I know you have another meeting to attend. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
And we will now move on. Before we move on to our next presentation, we are pleased to invite Dr. Kimberly Hon, a member of the Sleep and Performance Research Center and associate professor in the College of Medicine at Washington State University in Spokane, Washington in the US, and most importantly, the president of the Working Time Society, to say a few words about the society, its mission, and its activities. So Kimberly, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kyriaki. The Working Time Society is an association focused on research and practices regarding psychosocial aspects and health problems connected with night and shift work, and more generally with working hours. We work closely with the ICOH Scientific Committee on shift work and working time. The International Symposium on Shift Work and Working Time has been held approximately every 2 years since 1969. Our next meeting will be in June 2027 in Loughborough, England. We would love to have you join us there. So in just over a year, June of 27, that's where our meeting will be. It moves to countries around the world for hosting. We just had our 2025 meeting in Brazil, and it was a wonderful meeting and a great time to connect with colleagues that we didn't get to see during COVID. Our website is workingtime.org if you want to learn more about us. And on a more personal level, the WTS is an exceptionally warm and welcoming group of individuals from around the world with a shared enthusiasm and passion for science. And I'm positive that should you come join us for a meeting, that you'll be stimulated by the science, the conversations, and the energy of the community there. I think it's a great place to share your science, to learn about what others are doing, and to put our heads together to identify problems and identify solutions for these issues. So we are thrilled on behalf of the Working Time Society to support this webinar and to partner with ICO Peru and with the ICO Scientific Committee on Shiftwork and Working Time. So thank you for working together with us on all of this.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. And I will now hand over to my co-host, Dr. Mera Chu Norville, to present the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Piriaki, and thank you, Dr. Kimberly Hon, and of course to the Working Time Society for all the support to commemorate this very important date, and of course for all your hard work in the society, the Working Time Society, for improving workers' health and workers' sleep status. So it's my pleasure to now introduce you to Dr. Imelda Wong. Imelda Wong, with a PhD, she is the chair of the ICO Scientific Committee of Shiftwork and Working Time, and an internationally recognized expert on occupational fatigue. She just completed, actually over 10-year tenure at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, where she launched and led the Center for Work and Fatigue Research. In this role, she conducted industry-specific studies and advised other U.S. federal agencies, DOT, DOI, DOE, and international entities such as World Health Organization, ILO, national governments, on fatigue risk management policies. Imelda has been a guest editor for two of them journal issues, Industrial Health and the American Journal of Industrial Medicine, which highlighted determinants and risk of work-related fatigue and effective mitigation strategies to advance worker safety, health, and well-being. The articles in these issues identify knowledge gaps and needs and suggest future directions for occupational fatigue research and mitigation. Imelda was recently elected as the chair of the International Commission on Occupational Health Scientific Committee for Shift Work and Working Time, and continues working globally to improve worker safety and health. Welcome, Dr. Imelda. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I will make you co-host.
Excellent. Thanks, Norville.
I'm
just going to share my screen. Excellent. So I should be sharing my screen.
Yes, it works.
Excellent. Okay, great. So thank you for the lovely introduction. Happy World Sleep Day, everyone. It is an honor and a pleasure to participate in today's panel. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the results from a Cochrane review that we did a few years back that examined changing shift schedules to improve sleep and sleepiness among shift workers. So in my many years of experience as an occupational health researcher, the question I'm most frequently asked by employers, workers, health and safety experts is, what is the best work or shift schedule? This is really a loaded question. Do you mean in terms of worker safety and health, or productivity, or both? There's a lot of organizational and individual variability that makes what seems like a very simple question really quite complex. So let's try to simplify by focusing on improving sleep and sleepiness with changes in work scheduling. So just a quick review about what we know about shift work, which we have defined as work outside of standard daytime hours. It often leads to insufficient and poor sleep that can compromise worker alertness with cascading effects on health and safety. One of the methods of alleviating these adverse effects of shift work is to change work schedules. Simple. Right? It's also very complex. There are many considerations with the effects on health, such as start time, number of hours per shift, rotating or fixed schedules, speed and direction of rotating systems, time off during and between shifts, and the regularity of shifts, just to name a few. But despite all the warnings and concerns, and with all the work that we've done in the past decades, there's still changes in shift on at work. There's a lot of differences So to try to standardize the literature and evaluate across studies, we embarked on this Cochrane review. We're not aware of the Cochrane Group. They are a global independent network of researchers, professionals, patients, carers, anyone who's generally interested in health. There are over 7,500 library, both in detailed scientific versions and some in plain language. And some are also available as podcasts. Cochrane reviews are recognized as the international gold standard for high quality trusted information. They are considered to be the leaders in evidence synthesis, but I also want to stress the methodologies are very, very strict and also includes things like grading for risk of bias and types of measures used and so forth. And so please keep this last point in mind because I will return to this later on and you will understand why. So very briefly, our methodology included a literature search that was first conducted in December 2020 and then updated again in April 2022. We searched 11 databases with no language restriction. And this is where the very strict part of Cochrane reviews was very limiting with study design, both in a beneficial and challenging way. We restricted study designs to only randomized control trials as the gold standard, where workers are randomly assigned to different shift schedules. However, we also included non-randomized control trials, but all included studies measured sleep and or sleepiness at least once before and at least once after a shift schedule change. So some examples for researchers in the audience, this would be controlled before and after trials, interrupted time series, or crossover trials. We included many types of shift schedule components in our search, like permanency of shifts, regularity of shifts changes, direction and speed of shift rotation, shift duration, start time of shifts, distribution of shift schedules, time off within between shifts, split shifts, on-call shifts, and whether or not workers participated in work scheduling. And our primary outcomes were sleep quality and duration on shift were available. And where it wasn't, we accepted measures over a 24-hour duration. We accepted responses in sleep diaries, subjective measures using validated surveys, and objective measures such as actigraphy, sleepiness during the shifts, night shifts if possible. We also accepted subjective sleepiness, again, through validated questionnaires and self-rated fatigue, physiological measures, and behavioral indicators of sleepiness. So our search strategy yielded 13,374 articles, in which 2 articles were obtained from other sources. After removing 2,534 duplicates, we screened the titles and abstracts of the remaining 10,840 records. Almost all of them did not meet our inclusion criteria, which left us with 64 articles for a full text review. And from these, we further excluded 43 articles for reasons such as lack of validated methods for the outcome assessment, wrong types of intervention, or wrong study design. So from these, we found that there were 11 studies reported in 15 articles, including a total of 2,125 participants. Our eligibility criteria for a qualitative synthesis, which means we provide a general description. Amongst all of these studies, only 7 had enough information together. The results cited articles are listed on the left, with the bolded ones that were included in the meta. 2 non-read in the conclusions because it does not reflect real life situations. Studies emanated from high-income countries, with a majority from the US, 2 from the UK, and 1 each from Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany. Industries were mostly from manufacturing and public safety, specific health industries that were included, and population sizes ranged widely from 31 to 400. 5 of schedules. Most studies reported today. I can tell you that sleep duration was ascertained in 10 studies with subjective and objective measures. This includes validated surveys as sleep diaries, sleep quality was self-rated and gathered through validated surveys such as the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, the basic Nordic Sleep Questionnaire, and through sleep diaries, and also with a visual analog scale ranging from best sleepiness during shifts was reported in and also that addressed schedule rotation, so they're listed on the bottom of the slide. For those who may not be familiar with the terms backwards and forward rotation, you can think of rotation following a clock time and the natural circadian rhythms that humans follow. Or analog clock would mean that workers to nights. And so all studies examine switching from backwards to forwards rotation. Some workers acted as a control where they remained on a backwards rotation, and others were assigned to the intervention, which was the new forward rotating schedule. The studies would compare all workers before the shift schedule change and then again after the shift schedule change to see if there was any differences between those who moved into the forward rotating schedules and those who remained in the backwards rotations. So all 3 studies were non-randomized trials, meaning that workers were not randomly assigned to either schedule types. In terms of sleep duration, our meta-analysis found that there was little or no difference in sleep duration and quality between forward rotating shifts and backward rotating shifts. In the single study that measured self-reported sleepiness, workers who switched to forward rotating reported almost 1 less day of on-shift sleepiness, whereas those workers who remained in the backwards rotating schedule, the numbers of days of sleepiness increased by almost half a day. But when we applied the strict Cochrane grading system, we had to conclude that the evidence was very low certainty. We examined the speed of rotation, which was defined as how rapidly the shifts changed. The control condition would be a very slow or slow rotation. And so the example here would be 7 nights followed by either 7-day shifts or 7 days off. The intervention would be a move to a fast rotation. And the example here are 2 night shifts followed by 2 day shifts, or again, either 2 days off. Again, some workers remained in the very slow or slow rotation, and some were assigned to the faster rotation. Our meta-analysis found that changing from very slow or slow rotating schedules may have a small effect on reducing sleep duration of approximately 12 minutes. We did not find any effects on sleep quality, but self-rated sleepiness at work and the numbers of days of sleepiness at work were reduced for those who moved to a faster rotation. However, because again, the nature of the studies, we had to grade the evidence as very low certainty. We looked at shift duration in 2 ways. The first is by maximizing shift length. And so there were 2 studies that were included in our analysis. The motivation behind these articles was the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education proposed changing the shift limits for medical interns from 16-hour limits to 24-hour limits with an additional 4 hours allowed for transition of care. So that's why you're seeing the 24 to 28-hour limit. In both studies, participants were were randomly assigned to either schedule. The other bit that I really need to tell you about these articles is that both were trying to show or demonstrate the dangers of moving to a much longer shift duration. So the comparisons were demonstrating how much more favorable a 16-hour limit was than a 24 to 28-hour limit. I also want to stress that I'm presenting the results of our meta-analysis and not the findings of the individual studies. So our meta-analysis found that there was longer sleep duration with the 16-hour limit by almost 42 minutes per day, which is pretty significant. But there was no difference in the self-rated sleepiness between the 16-hour limit and the 24/28-hour limit. And as you can see, the evidence ranged from low to moderate certainty. Sleep quality was not examined. And in case you're wondering, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education ended up adopting the longer shift limit of 24 to 28 hours. We also examined shift duration as shorter versus longer hours. Shorter shifts were defined as a standard 8 to 10 hours, and the intervention were shifts that were just a few hours longer, so approximately 12 to 13 hours. Findings across studies were mixed, so our pooled meta-analysis reported no difference in sleep duration, sleep quality, nor self-rated sleepiness, and our grading efforts found that the evidence was very low certainty. Our last comparison was focused on compressed work schedules. The comparison was between a standard 40-hour work week, which was distributed as 8-hour shifts over 5 days, followed by 2 days off, and a compressed schedule, which took the same 40-hour work week and compressed it into 4 10-hour days with 3 days off. So the same 40 hours per week, but over a fewer number of days. And there are many workers who prefer these compressed schedules because it gives them more days off. The studies included in the analysis were a mix of randomly assigned and non-randomly assigned workers to these compressed schedules. Results of our meta-analysis reported no difference in sleep duration or quality off shift, although the results were very low certainty, and our findings for self-rated sleep were inconclusive. So that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. So what does this all mean? Well, in terms of implication for practice, we found that there was a clinically relevant reduction in sleepiness during shifts with moving to forward rotating schedules and with faster rotations. And I'm going to clarify that clinical relevant is a term that's frequently used by Cochrane because their reviews are often used by clinicians. And how we defined clinical relevancy was in discussions with experts and the authors of the papers. You may recall that the forward rotation resulted in 1 day less of sleepiness, and faster rotations resulted in an additional 12 minutes of sleep per night, which over time can really add up. We also did not find any harmful events with rapid forward rotation of night shifts. And from that, we could conclude, excuse me, it is particularly important for organizations to involve employees in shift scheduling modifications and to evaluate the effects on employees. In terms of maximum shift limits, we found that longer sleep durations occurred with shifts that had a 16-hour limit, but there was no difference in sleepiness between the two schedules. So we conservatively recommended caution with long work weeks and for shifts for greater than 16 hours. Although, as you've heard me mention, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education has already adopted the longer 24-hour shift limit. And we did not find any effects on improving sleep or sleepiness with moving to a longer work hours or with a compressed schedule. So what does this mean for research? So let me read you a quote from the study. Most evidence was very low or low certainty due to lack of randomized control trials and other study limitations such as small sample sizes and subjective measurements of sleep and sleepiness. This implies the true effect of shift schedule interventions could be substantially different than our estimates. And this is really where I'm glad I can't hear the collective sigh of exasperation from the audience, because I know we're all thinking the same thing. But let me carry on. Our Cochrane recommendations include doing more cluster random control trials with subjective and objective measures. The trials should be carried out systematically across work sectors and geographic regions, documenting workers, chronotype, age, and autonomy over working times to address potential interactions. And this is a really good one. Researchers use and protocol. These really would be ideal situations, but as many of you know, our research is messy, and sometimes to work within the confines of what's feasible with the population that we're studying. And this is where Cochrane, or more accurately, its strict methodology, might not be the best avenue to synthesize results. Although I am hearing they are starting to develop different guidelines for observational studies like we do. So revisiting what we know, shift systems are complex and multiple. Additionally, sleep and sleepiness are multifaceted. Although Cochrane is a highly regarded gold standard systematic review, I'm not entirely sure it is an appropriate assessment, or the methods we use was entirely appropriate for the assessment of impact of shift work and scheduling on sleep and sleepiness because of the complexities I just mentioned. We really could only concentrate on one or two specific components because that's what was provided in the literature. But in reality, changes in work schedules are also accompanied by organizational changes like work tasks, staffing levels, or with other scheduling components. And all of these could be beneficial or adverse. And to be honest, I think there is still a lot we don't know, but I think this is a good start to identify broad-based practices that are beneficial and then to tailor them for specific workplaces and industries to account for variabilities. So back to the question I most frequently asked, what is the best schedule? And I think I'm going to use the response that it depends. But I encourage everyone to continue doing important research and asking the questions that build the knowledge and body of our literature. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to questions and the discussion. So I think we're going to head to our, oh, I'll leave it to you.
No, sorry. I think we have a question, Dr. Imelda, at the chat. Let me check. Yes, we have one question from Isabel. Which dimensions of shift work, for example, timing, shift length, intensity, intervals, etc., should future studies focus on in order to be able to provide better scheduling recommendations?
Isabel, that's a great question. Oh, I'm hearing a bit of an echo.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, thanks. Isabel, that is a great question and a difficult question. I think it really depends on the population you're studying. I feel like right now the focus is on shift length. But again, it's difficult to implement just one component, although we should study one component. But if I had to choose one right now, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on shift length. But again, keep in mind that the complexity is there. And I am not seeing any more questions. Oh, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I will turn things back over to you, Norval. Thank you.
There's another question from Dr. Kiriaki. Traditional shift work studies emphasize sleep duration and quality, but many shift workers often suffer from irregular sleep timing and circadian misalignment. Do you think sleep timing variability should become a main outcome in shift work research in addition to sleep duration quality?
Thanks, Kiriaki. That's a great question. I think it's complex. Sorry, Norval. I'm going to have to ask you to mute for a second.
Yeah, you can be host. Okay. Let me add you as host. Okay. Now you're the host again.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I agree, Kiriaki. I think sleep timing, as you mentioned, should become a main outcome in shift work research. And I think that Phil did a great job of presenting that earlier. There's a lot of individual variability, and I think that helps inform the workers themselves and employers on what kind of guidance should be provided to address these individual variabilities. I think the complexity is just whether or not you can get the experts to collaborate on a lot of these types of shift schedule studies to provide the guidance needed on shift sleep timing variability.
Mm-hmm. And Imelda, I guess when you were doing the review, you found no studies that were looking into sleep irregularity, for example, as an outcome. So there were no studies on using this.
That's right. Yeah, that wasn't something that we had looked at. I will tell you the Cochrane review that we took on was a continuation of a topic that's already in the Cochrane library. So what you can do is you can look at the Cochrane library, see what reviews have been done, and then you can update. So this was a continuation of work that someone had done several years ago.
Thanks.
Thank you. Excellent. I'll turn back over to you, Norval. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Imelda, for such a wonderful presentation and for sharing with us your research. I'm going to claim the host so I can. Oh, sorry. Okay, now I am the host and I will introduce to our next speaker. So, we are very delighted to introduce you to Dr. Rachel Mock. Dr. Rachel received her PhD in neuroscience from Washington State University and is currently a postdoctoral research associate at Washington State University's Sleep and Performance Research Center. Her research focuses on the neurobiological mechanisms underlying fatigue, especially how genetic polymorphisms and pharmacological countermeasures modulate individual vulnerability and task-dependent vulnerability to sleep loss. Beyond her laboratory work, Dr. Mock is a specialist in fatigue risk management. She translates sleep science into data-driven insights to enhance operational safety, and her work has explored the integration and efficacy of fatigue mitigation technology in automated operational settings. So welcome, Dr. Rachel. It's a pleasure to have you here as one of our speakers. Thank you. Welcome. I will make you host.
Thank you so much, Norval.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here presenting along such accomplished colleagues. So I'll be presenting about beyond the average shift worker, individual differences in sleep performance and pharmacological interventions. So a lot of the time we end up looking at what the average shift worker looks like. What's their average sleep duration? What's their average performance? And so there are some things, well, not just some things, there's a lot of things we know on average, but just to go over that, we know on average sleep loss impairs performance. So this is the psychomotor vigilance task. It's the gold standard for measuring vigilant attention during sleep loss. And we see that as time awake increases, there's an increase in this performance impairment. We also know that sleep loss increases total sleep time, slow wave sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep. But their average hides substantial inter-individual differences in performance and sleep. So with this same data set, with the psychomotor vigilance task, I've identified the 5 most vulnerable and the 5 most resilient individuals. And it's not that vulnerability and resiliency is dichotomous. It's not that you're one or the other. It is a spectrum in here. But this is just to show that this is being hidden when we look at the group average. And there's also these individual differences in sleep architecture as well, where the black bars are showing the magnitude of individual differences, and that's actually larger than the effect of sleep deprivation itself. And these individual differences are trait-like. They're robust, they're consistent within individuals, and they're repeatable. So this is that similar vigilant attention performance data across sleep deprivation. This is rank ordering the subjects. So subject U on the left has the least impairment, and subject E on the right has the greatest impairment. And So with each of these symbols is a repeated administration of sleep deprivation. So you can see that even though they go through multiple rounds of sleep deprivation, their performance within an individual is highly stable, and then that makes it trait-like. But we also see these individual differences not just in the performance with sleep loss, but we see it in sleep inertia as well. So this is the sleep inertia for the MEG, which is that groggy feeling you get when you wake up. And this is the subjective sleepiness of that sleep inertia. So it's also highly repeatable and stable within individuals with various dosages of sleep extension and sleep restriction. And I also want to highlight work from my colleagues that there's individual differences in slow wave sleep and sleep architecture that is also trait-like. So similar rank ordering, but from a different study now. And even though they have multiple rounds of, this is a baseline nighttime sleep. So it's 10 hours, their slow wave sleep duration is highly stable. And that's also robust to after caffeine and sleep deprivation. So the darker colors are higher doses of caffeine, and that although it reduced the total amount of slow wave sleep that they obtained, it was still highly stable and trait-like within an individual. But my research is primarily focused on performance with sleep loss. And so, why do I really care about these individual differences? Because it's kind of complicated, but it gets a little bit more complicated because these individual differences in performance are actually task dependent. So, it depends on what you're looking at and how these individual differences are going to manifest. So, going back to this plot, I've now color coded these individuals with a nice rainbow so you can see which participants are which. So these are the same participants now from vigilant attention. Their rank ordering now changes with subjective sleepiness, and that changes further when you look at a word detection task. So it's not just that these individual differences exist, but they're task dependent. And so if you look at subject U, which has the pink, they're extremely resilient on the vigilant attention, but they're a little bit more vulnerable to subjective sleepiness, to sleep deprivation, and then they're more on the vulnerable end for the word detection task. So this gets back to the point that vulnerability and resiliency isn't dichotomous. It is a spectrum, and it's all relative to what you're comparing it to. But the interesting part is that it's task dependent. And so what this looks like, though, if we go back to that psychomotor vigilance task data where we've identified the 5 most vulnerable and the 5 most resilient, if we look at how they report their subjective sleepiness during sleep deprivation, their performance is actually, their subjective sleepiness is actually very similar. So even though they're reporting greater fatigue in the blue curve, their objective performance is greater in the blue curve. They're reporting similar levels of fatigue to the resilient individuals. But so now that there's these individual differences, it's task dependent. What does that mean in the real world? How are we supposed to mitigate this? Well, work I did earlier on in my dissertation was I looked at if the timing of optimal performance on these tasks was task dependent. And so we modeled the circadian rhythms for these the circadian rhythms for distinct tasks after accounting for individual differences in their circadian rhythm. We did that with dim light melatonin onset, similar to what Dr. Chang talked about. And then the individual differences in the homeostatic process as well with time awake. And we found that their optimal performance clustered in the wake maintenance zone. So that's this peak. Here's the wake maintenance zone. It's in the late afternoon, early evening was their optimal performance. And then their impairment clustered in the morning hours. So across these tasks, it was temporally aligned. So that's great news because if you're working a shift, you don't have to worry about you just got on shift, you're impaired on one task, and then a couple hours later, you're going to be impaired on another task, and a couple hours later, it's different. So you're not playing the game whack-a-mole where you're trying to mitigate impairment, and then the next one. At least they're all temporally aligned. So if you're mildly impaired on one task and severely impaired on another, at least they should be happening at the same time of day. But this doesn't, so this helps with the timing of interventions. You can personalize the interventions if you know where an individual's at in their circadian and homeostatic process. It's predictable. But this doesn't speak to the magnitude of impairment that you get, which, as I've been saying, that is task dependent. You can be vulnerable, more vulnerable on one, more resilient on another. So now, how are we going to mitigate these task-dependent differences? Well, one way is with stimulant countermeasures. So caffeine is, I first want to talk about caffeine because it's the most widely available stimulant. We're all probably familiar with it. I have my cup of coffee right here. It's an adenosine receptor antagonist. And our group has showed that caffeine is really good at mitigating performance impairment during sleep deprivation. So 200 milligrams of caffeine and 300 milligrams of caffeine, they actually had similar effects at mitigating impairment. So it wasn't that if you got a higher dose of caffeine that conferred better mitigation impairment. It was actually not dose effective. But I also want to talk about modafinil, because that's another wake promoting stimulant countermeasure that's commonly used, but it has a different mechanism of action. So it's a dopamine transporter antagonist. And modafinil is commonly prescribed for sleep disorders or excessive daytime sleepiness, but it can also be used off-label in some operations, especially the military and special operations. And we know that there's individual differences in the responsiveness to caffeine and modafinil themselves. A lot of people can identify themselves as being caffeine sensitive or caffeine insensitive. And many prescribers know that there's also that individual responsiveness to modafinil. Some people tolerate it better than others. But what I really want to point out with this is that there's some evidence that suggests caffeine and modafinil's effects on performance may be task dependent. So it could be due to their different underlying mechanisms that they could be differentially affecting different tasks because of that mechanism. But this would have significant operational consequences as well if this were true. That if if your operation involves this sort of task, dramatically investigate this further and see if caffeine and modafinil do exert task-dependent differences in the risk deprivation study. We assessed a few different computerized tasks. So not just that psychomotor vigilance task, but also we have subjective sleepiness, some cognitive throughput, positive and negative affect. So that's positive and negative mood. And also a reversal learning task, which measured associative learning and inhibitory control. And there were repeated dosages of either caffeine, modafinil, or placebo during this time. So double blind placebo